All right, seems like we got most everybody on. Thank you everyone for attending. We're excited to kind of go over these topics with you. Make sure you guys can see my screen. It looks like you can. So a little bit about ourselves. I'm David Diaz. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at Walker Blue, joined by Josh Howes, who is our CEO and a PE. And we wanted to kind of get into the topic a little bit of the ITC, specifically talking about the direct pay and how it works, and go through some case studies for the investment tax credit that we have here. So excited to put on a pretty informative webinar for everybody today. Feel free to, as you go, put the questions in the question and answer box. That should be at the bottom middle of your screen. There's a Q&A component. If you can use that docket, we would greatly appreciate it. We'll try to either answer the questions, we'll likely answer the questions at the end, but we will, if there's something we see come through that's relevant, we may answer it in real time. So with that being said, we'll get started on the cutting operating costs with federal energy tax incentives. Excited to be here today. So, all right, a little bit about what we're talking and why are we talking? What's the reason we're here discussing the investment tax credit and the opportunities? So, we've been seeing, we work with a ton of ESCOs, energy companies, energy improvement companies, and we see a trend come up time and time again that facilities owners are experiencing compounding deferred maintenance, operating cost between inflation and just energy costs in general are on the rise much faster than capital budgets can keep up with them. And there's always a competing priorities for capital allocation. It's kind of been the trend we've been seeing in the MUSH market, municipal, university, schools, hospitals, etc. So the beautiful thing, and it's a program that's been around since it's been around for quite a long time, but got really enhanced under the Inflation Reduction Act, is the ability to use elective pay for energy renewable type projects. So elective pay provides a non-taxpayer funded way to modernize infrastructure. It upgrades, the upgrades reduce energy spend. So when we're talking energy projects, solar, wind, geothermal, they reduce your energy spend. They help with the maintenance burden. You can help inject some cost reductions and stabilize some of those operating budgets. And again, the tax incentives come in the form of a cash payout, which is a very, very attractive program from that perspective. It's not a tax credit, even though it is a tax credit. When we talk about this sector, it comes in the format of a direct payment from the IRS. So that's one of the things that makes it very attractive and can really help on cutting your operating costs quite a bit. So a little bit about the objective here. So the objective is to provide some public and nonprofit leaders with clear, actionable understanding on how the elective pay works, and how it allows tax-exempt entities to monetize federal energy tax credits for cash payments. So this session is going to outline how these funds can support facility upgrades, reduce operating costs, and advance long-term energy and sustainability goals, while covering the key requirements around timing, considerations, and some of the lessons learned from the early adopters. Josh and I have been really doing this since, Josh a little longer than me, but since the Inflation Reduction Act really sparked this. Our client base was the energy companies, the ESCOs. They had a need for our service here, and they asked us to help them and operate this. So we have some pretty good history and experience on some of these as they start to come to fruition, and love to share it with you all. All right, Josh, if you want to jump into kind of what the elective pay is and what it's all about.
Yep, absolutely. Hey, everybody. Look forward to this discussion, and like David said, put your questions in, and we'll get to those at the end. We'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end. So, like David said, elected pay is something that came about in the Inflation Reduction Act. It was before that, it was a PPA, right? So you were basically having to find a private owner to own the asset so that the tax credit could be passed to them. And then they would sell it back, either energy as a service or some way get it back into the hands of the schools. Now with direct pay or elective pay, you're just going to get cash for your tax credit. So there's no need to involve that third party, which has just been a huge benefit to streamline a lot of these projects and get these things going a lot quicker than they used to be able to do. So the nice thing is there's no haircut or anything for the most part. It's the full value. So you're not having to, with the PPA, you're kind of having to spread that around to the different parties that are involved. But this is 100% going back to the school that does the project as long as you maintain the ownership for 5 years. So really good program. It sparked a lot of work in the solar and geothermal specifically. So there's really no that's why a lot of these projects are happening right now, just because it's cash money coming back to you. So it's just been a great program. Is this me?
Yeah, that's you, Josh.
All right. So basically, who qualifies for elective pay? There's several entities. Obviously, the governmental entities is the big target. So state and local governments will qualify. School districts qualify. Municipalities will qualify. So from the government side of things, it's really anybody who's not the federal government, basically from that standpoint. So the federal government is not eligible for direct pay. So they still have to do the PPA route or some form or fashion of that. But everybody else is eligible. So it's been a huge benefit for a lot of local and county government, city governments, county governments, school districts. The other groups that are involved are the five basically nonprofits, traditionally 501c3, 501d type organizations. So in that group, essentially, if you are a non-tax paying entity, you are going to be eligible for direct pay. So it basically takes PPA off the table for all of those entities prior that had to find that partner. So, we're including tribal governments, all those types. So basically any type, if you are considered a non-tax paying entity, you're going to be eligible for this program.
I'll jump back in here. So as far as the applicable energy tax credits go, there's really two ends to it. One's the traditional Section 48, which was then got enhanced and changed into Section 48E for most of the systems. So under Section 48, you got fuel cell, solar, geothermal, small wind, energy storage, biogas, microgrid controllers, and combined heat and power. We did see a change where Section 48E was added and phased out some of the components and moved them over into. So solar now and winds currently sit under Section 48E. And the reason that's important is that there's some impacts when it comes to the big beautiful bill as far as timing around some of these types of projects, and the attempted phase out of solar and wind specifically has been a major effect. So again, if you're in the process of considering these projects, there is still a very good opportunity. Specifically when we talk about geothermal and energy storage or battery storage, those have a 10-year lifespan. So currently we're good through 2034 when it comes to those. It's pretty great opportunity. Gives a little bit of time to plan. Again, barring any major legislative changes or anything of that nature, but I think we saw our big legislative change come with the big beautiful bill a couple months ago. So I don't, who knows, but I don't expect there to be anything that's of a crazy impact when it comes to geo and energy storage. So hopefully I'm correct, but you never know. So, Josh, if you want to get into the big beautiful bill and kind of some of those changes and what those impacts were.
Yeah, so like David said, everything that used to be in Section 48 has been moved over to Section 48E, except for the geothermal. That's been left into Section 48. So the big beautiful bill targeted Section 48E, and then specifically inside Section 48E, it targeted solar and wind. So your project must be under construction by July 4th of next year in order to qualify for the ITC. If you miss that deadline, and then you have until the end of 2027 to get placed into service. Now that's just solar and wind. The One Big Beautiful Bill targeted 48E outside of solar and wind with rules like FIOC that's coming, that starts next year. So FIOC is going to be a test on both your ownership and leadership type influence from the foreign entities, and then it's also going to test where you're getting your materials from. So those rules are in place for Section 48E coming out of the Big Beautiful Bill starting next year. Where Section 48 is nice is because geothermal stayed back into Section 48. And so if you're doing a geothermal project under Section 48, you don't have these new rules. You don't have any of the expiration dates coming. And so the Big Beautiful Bill preserves Section 48 in its entirety and did not place any new restrictions on it. But since everything got moved over to 48E except for geothermal, we've got some new things coming, and we need to get ready. If you're going to be building a solar or wind project, you need to be paying attention to these deadlines so that you can still qualify for the ITC.
So a little bit about the planning considerations. So again, due to those, kind of Josh was touching on it a little bit, but it's really important that you start planning and planning with, to ensure that you're meeting the FIOC, or even better, if you're meeting domestic content requirements. That's a 10% adder, and you'll automatically meet the FIOC requirements, at least from a material perspective. So that's a very important piece to be planning. We've been doing a ton of consulting on safe harboring projects and making sure that they're going to be compliant. So if you have a project that it's in development, you're not too sure about, if it makes sense, or what the FIOC and domestic content landscape might look like for your project, have a conversation with us. We're excited to help you. We partner with a lot of the energy companies to specifically help guide them through that process. So that's what we're here for. Couple things to also keep in line. If you're looking at a large project, anything over a megawatt, it's important to make sure that your prevailing wage and apprenticeship tracking starts in order to get the full ITC value. So it's very difficult to go and retroactively true that up if you mess it up. So it's important that it's put into your contract that this is a requirement, and that your contractors and subcontractors are going to have to comply with the prevailing wage and apprenticeship tracking. Walker Blue offers a service where we will help manage that process from beginning to end of the project. We'll do weekly payroll tracking. We'll go through all the wage reports and confirm that it qualifies for the incentive. So that's another service that we offer that can be very valuable when you're planning projects, to bring us in as that partner to do the prevailing wage and apprenticeship tracking at the early stages of the project. So again, you should be reviewing your lease structures if you are in a project that you're going to be leasing, to make sure that they meet the requirements. and again, can consult and partner with federal energy tax experts, which that's what Walker Blue is, on the administrative burden and making sure that you have audit ready documentation, which is a very important piece to this, right? So like, why does this matter? From that perspective, is some of these projects we're talking about millions of dollars that are getting given back in the form of a tax refund. We've seen very little audit activity at this point, but we will start seeing audit activity. It's only a matter of time, as these large checks and large payments start to change hands, that the IRS will start to look into these into some detail, and having an independent third party like Walker Blue come in and make sure that everything is on the up and up is a super important component to that process. So I've got a little case study for you guys. Josh, I'll let you kind of jump in on this K through 12 case study of recent project we just finished.
Yeah, so we we just did a tax credit study for a school district in Michigan. The start date was December of 23, and they placed it in service in June of 25. They did a full roof replacement and rooftop solar on, we figured almost half the roof got covered by solar. That's kind of the setup for this. What we were able to get for them is obviously they were under a megawatt, so they automatically qualified for the 30%. They were hoping to get the domestic content adder of 10%. And we looked at that both ways through the safe harbor method and also the cost method. And I'll go into that on the next slide. But we were able to get the 10% bonus for domestic content, which gave them a total of 40%. They were not in an energy community. They were not in a low income community. So those were not possible for them. So 40 was the max. They were able to get 40%. But again, so when we do these studies, it's a matter of 40% of what, right? So that's kind of the big key, but we did get them 40%. So if you're tracking percentages, that's the 30 plus the 10 for the domestic content. So the next slide shows kind of how we broke this school down. The total project was about 5.1 million. And we determined through our analysis that a little over 3.5 million qualified for ITC. So what we do when we do this process is we're trying to establish of the costs that were spent, how much were spent on the solar project itself and how much was spent on other things outside the solar project. And so there's some black and white areas when we start dealing with these. Obviously, things like panels and inverters and racking, those types of expenses are clearly solar expenses. Then you have things like, maybe some ancillary costs, like maybe they did some work inside, maybe they did some roof work on a roof that didn't have any solar on it. Those are clearly not solar expenses. So then it's a matter of, okay, well, what about some of these expenses that happened in and around the solar project? And so we kind of go through those and determine which ones we can stand behind as being for the solar project and because of the solar project, and which ones were kind of, they were done, but they had to be done anyway. And so we're not going to be able to count those. And so as you go down this list, you're looking at solar design and material. Obviously, those are all clearly in. The solar installation costs are clearly in. The big gray area, right, when we get to it is now, what about the roof replacement, right? So the school spent 2.2 million on the roof, and we figured 800,000 of that was for the solar. It was required because of the solar. So for this particular job, we had collected some bids. So we took some bids from some solar contractors of what the roof would have cost without the solar, and compared that to what the roof costs with the solar. And then we basically, we didn't do a straight subtraction, because then we also went a little deeper and said, well, you've got some roof square footage there that was not covered by the solar, so you didn't necessarily have to upgrade that section of the roof, but you chose to anyway. And so, this particular client wanted to be, safe rather than sorry. They wanted to be a little bit on the conservative side. And so we only took the roof area that was covered by the solar, with some reasonable boundaries, borders around the solar. But we ended up determining that $800,000 worth of this roof could be counted towards the solar, which is a big win. I mean, that's a lot of money that, that was spent on the roof that they're going to get 40% back as far as the tax credit goes. And I think it's pretty important to keep in mind, this project, we qualified it based on the cost method instead of the safe harbor method, which is something that I think we have the unique ability to do because we're an engineering firm. We understand the construction and the costs that go into it. And we're able to kind of do a deep dive into the costs of your projects to kind of come at it from both ways on the domestic content. But honestly, this one, with $800,000 getting credit for the ITC of the roof, in some ways it's kind of a best case scenario. This one came out real favorable in our way. We don't normally see a third of a roof, getting put into the ITC money. Usually it's more like 0 to 10%. This one was exceptionally high, but it just happened to be because of the way that, they really spent a lot of extra money on the roof that wasn't necessary in order to beef it up for the solar. So just to kind of manage your expectations moving forward, it's not always going to be necessarily this much, but it could be. And, we're going to try to do what we can to come up with a number that we can defend, right? So because of the same percentage, we applied across all the roofing expenses at that point, right? Once we're able to determine the roof and how much of the cost of the roof count towards the ITC, then everything else that's kind of profit and overhead and design consultation and administrative consultation, those things kind of flow through with a similar percentage, right? And then, the same with the owner consultant fee. So all these are required, but they aren't all fully included because this whole project, the owner's consultant, they were the consultant for the whole project, but the whole project didn't qualify for solar. So we count the percentage of the owner's fee towards the solar in the same manner that we apply the solar costs to the overall project. So that's kind of a nuts and bolts way of going through it. So, if you guys have never been through one of these, this is a really good example. A little on the high side, probably, with the roof being as expensive as it was, but a really good example of how your project's going to break down and how we're going to determine how much money is eligible for the ITC.
Great, Josh. Thanks. So how do you get started? When we talk about elective pay, what happens, what has to happen, what does that process look like? So first, you have to do a qualified project. Kind of what Josh is going through in that case study is a project that met the requirements, fell under Section 48E, and you kind of plan it accordingly. One of the requirements is filing a pre-registration with the IRS via the IRS portal. Simple process, sometimes can be a little tricky from an administrative perspective. A service that we provide and help with is getting the projects pre-registered with the IRS. And it's kind of funny too, because they call it a pre-registration, but it kind of happens at the end of your project. So you can't really register until the project is complete. We know the placed in service date is complete. And then the other piece is a tax return has to be filed. A 990T has to be filed. Most of your tax exempt entities or governments or schools, you've never filed a 990T before. Our tax team can help with that process and get you filed and get the 990T put in for you. And then we got to wait, right? We got to receive that payment from Treasury in that form of a cash refund. So, and I'll get into there'll be some more detail on this a little later, but those are the big pictures of how it works. So again, when we confirm eligibility, we're determining that a project has the proper components and meet the requirements of the ITC. I mentioned earlier about doing a compliance setup. It's important that at the beginning of the project, you start planning. If your financials of the project include domestic content, we should come in there early on and make sure that the products and materials that are being planned to be used on that project meet the domestic content requirements, and that all your ratios, whether it be from cost perspective or the other methodology that's permitted, that we're in compliance there. So the other piece is, I mentioned it earlier, is the prevailing wage and apprenticeship tracking. Any project that's over 1 megawatt, if it's a geothermal project, it's over 250, 56 tons, Josh, or 258 tons.
284, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So anything over 284 tons is going to require a prevailing wage and apprenticeship compliance. So what is prevailing wage and apprenticeship? It's basically the rules around prevailing wage and apprenticeship state that 15% of your labor hours on the job have to comply and be performed by registered apprentices that are part of a registered apprenticeship program. So that's an important factor, right? Most contractors are used to the prevailing wage component. They're comfortable with the prevailing wage component and paying the federal Davis-Bacon. They've been doing it for a long time. The ESSER funds required it. It's a very common practice. The apprenticeship component is a new thing that is tripping some folks up, and again, it's really important that it gets tracked from day one, because if you do it wrong, it can set off your apprenticeship ratios being non-compliant, and it can also mess up your Davis-Bacon wages and your prevailing wage rate. If you don't follow the proper journeyman to apprenticeship ratios throughout the project. So again, that's a very important piece from a compliance perspective that needs to happen early on in the project, in pre-contract phases before the project gets into construction and commissioning. So then you build the project out, get it placed in service. As I mentioned, then we can do that IRS pre-registration form for you. We'll do at that point, when we're doing the pre-registration, after that, we'll have all the data from the project. Our team will go through, do that cost analysis, kind of how Josh went through on that case study. And we'll go through all your pay apps, all your plans and specs, and dig into the nitty gritty from an engineering and cost perspective of what applies. What is basis from a tax perspective that is eligible for the ITC, and going through and making those determinations. We'll put that together in a report that, in case of an audit, you can turn in from a defendability perspective, and we'll stand behind that as well. And we'll do audit support on the back end in case it was to get challenged beyond the report and certification we're going to be providing for you. So we'll get that tax return filed. And we'll also look at that point. We'll look if we have domestic content or if the prevailing wage has been being tracked. We will provide you a final report on all those factors that could be important to the project, as well as if you were trying to meet some of the safe harbor requirements as far as beginning of construction goes. We'll document all that in one defendable, documentable package for you. As far as then at that point, once we got all that information ready and it's ready to go, we got a nice hard number for you. It's defendable. We'll file that tax return. We don't have to file the tax return. We really bring all these services in, and sometimes we're only doing domestic content. Sometimes we're only doing the cost study. Sometimes we're rarely only doing the tax return, but if you already have a relationship with a tax provider that's going to file the tax 990T for you on the tax return, we don't have to be the ones to file it, but we can, and it has to get filed at some point. And our report will have all the information for your tax preparer to file. So again, not necessarily that we do it, but just needs to be done. And then you wait for your money. So, we've been seeing money come back, 45, 50 days, a couple months. It just depends. It depends on the IRS. Right now with the shutdown, everything's been kind of quiet and slow on that end. We haven't really seen the dollars coming back. The one good thing though is if you are waiting longer than 30 days for your refund, the IRS will pay interest, and we have been seeing a lot of our clients receiving interest for any time period taken beyond those 30 days. So again, the goal here is to get the money, not to have the IRS pay us interest, but it is nice that it's included in if the projects kind of take on a little bit of time frame. So Josh, do you want to get into kind of some of these timing and strategic considerations?
Yeah, so just for setting expectations, I think it's important to kind of know some tricks of the trade. If you just kind of go with the flow and do what you're normally doing, most school districts run on a July to June fiscal year. So any project that's placed into service in that fiscal year, you're going to file for your taxes after the year ends, and then you're going to receive your funds, like David said, probably 2 to 3 months later. It can be a little quicker. So we're expecting to see projects be filed, say like August, September, and then you're going to be getting hopefully your checks by the end of the year, right? That's kind of how it would normally flow for that. So if you finish your project in say like August, then if you just wait until the end of the fiscal year, so your project's gonna be done in August, you're not gonna finish your fiscal year until the following June, and then it's gonna be the following, November, December before you get your money. So you're looking at a long time potentially between completing your project to actually getting your tax credit money, right? So you can, if you've never filed a 990T before, you can change your fiscal year because you've actually never established it in the first place because you've never filed a tax return. So we can manipulate your tax years on your initial filing to maybe not run July to June, so that if you do finish something like in August, we could maybe end your fiscal year in October instead. And there's some tricks to that, but that's something that we can help you with to try to speed up the money that's headed your way. And then we can always adjust your fiscal year later if you file have to do a second filing. So if you've got another project coming in the following year, we could adjust your filing to get it right and back on track, especially if your project sets it up that way to where maybe your project this time is getting done in April or May, and a June fiscal year end would time it out real nice. So those are just some of the things to keep in mind. But if you don't want to mess around with your fiscal year, you're looking at potentially, depending on when you finish your project in that time frame, it could be a year plus before you get your money. So you want to keep that in mind, especially when you're planning on how are you going to pay for this project at the beginning. It might not be as quick of a payback on that tax credit if you're borrowing money, or if you're looking at using the ITC money for funds to fund another project. You really need to talk with somebody who knows what they're dealing with, so that you can plan appropriately for when you're actually going to get the money.
Josh, if you want, just keep going with the bonuses.
Okay.
Get into that as well, so that people can get
Yeah.
it.
So the way that the Inflation Reduction Act set it out, and the Big Beautiful Bill did not change any of this. So the way that the tax credit bonuses or the tax credits play out, it's a 6% base credit. the PWA gives you a 5 times multiplier, right? So the nice thing is if you're under a megawatt or you're under that 284 ton geothermal size, which is the equivalent of a megawatt, you're exempt from PWA and you automatically get the multiplier, right? So we see a lot of projects coming in at 900 and something kilowatts, right? Because we want to stay underneath that 1 megawatt. It really makes life easy if we can do that. So that's where the 30% comes in. If you're over a megawatt, you've got a lot of prevailing wage and apprenticeship tracking and documentation to do, not only and possibly paying more money for wages than you anticipated. So being under that megawatt's nice, but that's kind of how it's written. So if you're over a megawatt and there's nothing you can do about it, a lot of times that PWA is going to make sense for you to actually follow that, because the 30 minus 6 is 24%, and that could be a big number. So you get an additional 10% for domestic content. Now, keep in mind that's assuming you're getting the 5 times multiplier. All these do. So if you're not getting the 5 times multiplier, that's only going to be 2%. Same with energy community, 2 or 10%, and then low income community is typically 2 to 10%. It can be 4 to 20% if you're in certain housing districts and whatnot. But the key thing with the low income is not so much whether you're in the 10 or the 20%, it's that you're going to have to apply for that. So that's not guaranteed money. So even if you find yourself in a low income community, that has to be applied for. So you need to make sure that you are working with somebody who can help you apply for that low income bonus, and that the timing and kind of all the rules around not completing your project until you get approval for the money, and so on and so forth. So if you find yourself in a low income community, there's an additional planning piece that you need to be thinking about so that you can time your project, so that you can apply for that and wait for the federal government to make a decision on your application. So all that to say, your maximum potential credit's 70%. Realistically, it's probably more like 50. But if you find yourself checking all these boxes, you can certainly end up with 70% out the door. And then, like we talked about earlier, our Section 48 and a lot of the 48E that's not solar or wind, those start phasing out after 2032. So we've got a pretty good runway with these credits. Of course, solar and wind, we're phasing those out starting in July. So you need to keep that in mind. But we do have plenty of time. So if you've got a project that you're thinking about, particularly if it's not solar or not wind, now is really a good time to do it, because you're going to get 30, 40, 50% of your project paid for by the federal government. So I would definitely jump on it.
Yeah. Josh, you bring up a great point on that low income communities. It's kind of funny, right? Right before the webinar, I was talking with the ITC team here in the office, and they were having a discussion about a project that they were completing, and they had reached out to the client to make sure, because they were within a low income community, and the client was like, "Wait, did we mess this up?" And we're basically, unfortunately, that they hadn't filed for it. They had no idea they were in it. So it's important to kind of bring in the tax consultants on the front end of these projects to try to help with that. Again, there was no guarantee, because it is an allocation-based program, that they would have received it either way. But now at the end of the project, I mean, we were just hired a month and a half ago to do this project for this school district, and they're going, wait a minute, what about the low income community bonus? We're going, it's too late at this point. The project's done. That ship sailed. So yeah, just some things to kind of consider there. So let's talk about compliance and documentation. So it's really important, and I keep harping on it. I'm going to keep harping on it because it's important. The record keeping and certification, especially if you're going down the pathway of being over a megawatt, it's really, really important to have the payroll records maintained. It's important that all those payroll records are maintained per project, per building, as applicable. It's important that there's lots of documentations around, the supply chain and the materials if you're trying to get domestic content. And all that information needs to be held on to for at least 3 years. Post, I would even consider 10 years just in case. But you want to make sure that all that documentation gets held on to. And again, one of the big beautiful services that we offer is kind of helping put that all together for you and collecting it. But again, we really, really recommend integrating compliance early into the projects, making sure that all those boxes are checked and you have all that information. And something to keep in mind as well is if you have a project that's over 5 years, that's over a megawatt, you have a 5 years maintenance compliance for any maintenance or repairs on those projects. They have to be paid prevailing wage, and you have to keep documentation of that those any activities related to whether it be solar or geo or whatever around maintenance and repairs have to meet the prevailing wage wages being paid on that work for 5 years, because there's a 20% vesting period, and if the IRS comes back in year 6 or 7 and then tries to tack on to and look at the last couple years maintenance and you don't have that documentation, they can go back and claw that back as well. So really, really important from that perspective. Josh, you want to get into some of the pitfalls and opportunities here?
Yep, 100%. So the direct pay is a super nice program. The only problem with it that is something that the private sector doesn't deal with because they're actually receiving a tax credit. The direct pay recipients cannot miss their filing deadlines. So if you are late with your tax return, you will not get a tax credit. So you cannot go back and amend the tax return. You cannot go back and try to do a late filing and pay a penalty. It's just not going to happen. So we have to file these on time. You are able to file a 6-month extension. So you can get more time to get your tax returns filed, but you cannot be late. So that's a huge key piece in this. You want to be timely with your filings. Some of the other, maybe less damaging pitfalls, but more, but can come back to bite you in the end later, is your PWA is important if you're over a megawatt and you're not accurately tracking your prevailing wage and apprenticeship. When you get to the stage of actually filing your tax return and calculating your tax credit, and you find out at that point that you have, maybe underpaid some employees, or maybe you missed the mark on your apprenticeship percentages, those fines can be quite hefty. So it may cut into your tax credit in the on the back end after we discover these things when it's too late to remedy them. So you're not necessarily going to lose your 5 times multiplier, but it may cost you a lot to keep it. So PWA is very important. Same with domestic content. If you don't plan these things and you find out after you've built your project that you did not meet domestic content and you had it, had planned on it with your financing, that's a big mistake. So you want to make sure that some of these things have been thought about up front and you're tracking them as you go. Maybe there was a change order that happened that cost you some domestic content. You want to make sure that you're staying compliant as the project progresses. And then, of course, in the audit situation, right? If you've inaccurately calculated your cost basis and maybe you threw too many costs in and you threw some things in there that weren't part of the solar project or weren't part of the geothermal project and you just thought the IRS wouldn't catch it. Then if you get audited, obviously you're going to be paying the IRS a lot of money. The IRS likes to collect penalties and interest, and they're very hefty. And it may not be for 3 or 4 years down the road after the project was completed. So now you've got 3 or 4 years worth of interest. So that can be quite expensive. So you want to make sure that you're, paying attention to these things. Some of the, an audit may be a small percentage of you get audited, but the ones that do, If you've made any mistakes, they're going to catch those. So, the opportunity side of things, obviously elected pay can be combined. It can be stacked. We do a lot of that with local incentives. So obviously like utility rebates and things like that, those are not a factor. They do not take away from your ITC money. But there are also a lot of state programs out there, depending on the state that you're in. There's a lot of money for maybe a solar or geothermal project that's a local incentive. You can stack those things. The ITC isn't going to allow you to make money on the project. So, if you've got a bunch of money coming in from other sources that are considered grants or tax credits in the form of, kind of like maybe a state tax credit, you'll be able to stack them up to the cost of the project, with the exception of utility rebates. Utility rebates don't even calculate in. But you'll still get, you'd be in a nice situation to maybe have to reduce your ITC a little bit because you're getting more money than the project costs. So you're getting a free project. So that's a good place to be. I wouldn't sweat it too much. But the key thing for us, I think that part of this webinar is to make sure that no matter who you partner with, that you partner with somebody who knows what they're doing so that a lot of these opportunities can be taken advantage of, and a lot of the pitfalls, don't bite you at the end, so you can get that full ITC credit, when the time comes.
Yeah. And then, Josh, you talk about some of these timing risks around.
Yeah, we mentioned it. We already mentioned it earlier, but I think there's some confusion around exactly how the solar phases out. So there's really two opportunities to become compliant with the ITC. The first one is if you can start construction before July 4th of 26, you're eligible for the ITC for solar. This is only solar and wind, right? So there's not time to discuss it on this webinar, but we've done other webinars where we talked about how to get your project started under construction by that deadline. There's a couple of different methods to get those started. But however you go about it, you've got to be under construction before July 4th. However, if you miss that deadline, it doesn't mean you're not eligible for the ITC because there's a second deadline, and that is the end of 2027. So 12/31 of 27, you would have to be complete by that date. So it's an either or situation. So if you find yourself kind of planning a project right now and you're not going to make that July 4th deadline, as long as it's a small enough project that you can get completed by the end of 2027, you'll still be eligible for the ITC. So I think those are pretty important deadlines to understand, and then make sure that you're going to hit one or the other.
Yeah. And I guess some of the key takeaways here before we jump into the questions is, one, elective pay is still available post OBBBA, and direct funding opportunities are available from the perspective of tax exempt entities. We've said it multiple times, compliance is really important to make sure that you get all your money. Also said start planning early is a very, very important theme of this webinar is plan. A term that gets thrown around a lot is belt and suspenders. There's a lot of different ways to make sure you keep your pants up and don't end up in a situation that's unfortunate for you. The other piece is that renewable energy projects do have a direct impact on reducing your energy costs and lowering your operational costs. The ITC is a great opportunity to help kind of let some of these questions roll. So, all right. So a little bit about on the questions, Josh, if you want, I'll jump into some of these and we'll kind of get them answered. First question that we appreciate the questions. So it says, to clarify, since the Logan Airport in Massachusetts, for instance, does not pay property tax, would Massport be eligible for the ITC? So one thing is not paying property tax, and another thing is being tax exempt. So they would have to be a tax exempt organization, which I assume they are. Josh, what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, most airport authorities are tax exempt, and they would fall under kind of the municipality section. But yeah, there's probably a few exceptions out there where they are some for-profit airport authorities. So they would know when they filed for their EIN, they would know how they structured themselves, and so that would just be the key piece of information we'd want to collect.
Yeah. Another question was asked: is Section 179D still available, and are there energy efficient and are they energy efficiency tax credits or deductions? So Section 179D is still available. They're trying to phase it out for any projects that don't start construction prior to June 30th of 2026. We're hoping to see an extension on that. Well, fingers crossed. Call your congressman. Maybe not this week. Wait until they open the government back up, and then call your congressman. Tell him you want 179D back. But for the time being, yes, it is still available. It's probably we'll probably be seeing, if nothing changes, plenty of 179D being performed over the next 3 to 4 years from projects that are starting construction this year before that June 30th deadline of 2026. They are tax deductions though. The 179D is not eligible for the investment tax credit. It is not a direct pay eligible opportunity. The only way for tax exempt entities, and most of the time the energy companies are putting this into their agreements, and they're already factoring getting the 179D on the front end, so they're contractually already obligating themselves to be the ones to get that deduction. Most of the ESCOs we work with factor it in that fashion, but it can only be allocated to that designer. So next question says, how much of the total cost of the project is covered by the credit? I think this question got answered early, and we got into the details as far as what the percentages were. So I think that got covered during the webinar, so we won't get into that again. Another kind of a little bit more specific question, Josh. I'll let you kind of jump on this one a little bit, but it says, for a solar project, roof project, if the fiscal year ends August 31st and the project is completed by the July 2026 deadline, would you still be eligible, and when would you see the refund?
Yeah. So remember, the July deadline is the start of construction deadline. So yeah, if you got it done in July, you would be well in front of that, probably. Haven't started construction before July. So yeah, you'd be eligible. And then obviously it'd be a matter of, when you filed the tax return. So, you'd have, let's see, if you're end of August fiscal year, that's going to be January 15th would be your deadline to file. So if you filed, early January, taking it right up to the end, then you'd be looking at probably March or April before you got your money. Of course, you could get it sooner if you filed sooner, but that's kind of what you're looking at.
Yeah, nice. Another question says, are software subscription costs for the max 5 years associated with a SaaS provider still eligible for the incentives under Section 174, or has that changed with the big beautiful bill? I don't know.
Did they miss? You said 174?
Section 174. Yeah, I mean, they might be talking about the R&D tax credit, which. Yeah, that's a
different webinar.
Yeah, that's that's a different webinar. No, but I mean, if you are referring to the R&D tax credit, the big beautiful bill did kind of bring that back and got rid of the Section 174 issues that they were having on the R&D side of things. But yeah, that's definitely still an opportunity there on the R&D tax credit side of things for software. It's actually an expanded opportunity post Big Beautiful Bill. So another question says, do you mostly work with schools and helping them file paperwork? So yeah, we primarily, we work in two different fashions when it comes to who our client is and who we're servicing. First off, there's any of the government entities, the schools, the nonprofits. They hire us directly. You know, you'll hire your energy company to do your energy project. We'll get to the end. They'll get to the end of that, and they'll tell you, hey, now you need to find a tax provider to go help you. That's the role that Walker Blue is going to play in this process. So we will go through and handle that for you and help you out there. So if you have a project that's reaching completion or in progress even, our contact information is right here on the screen, and we'll send out a follow-up after this as well. Feel free to, let's set up a call, a meeting, and we can discuss how we can help you and what that would look like, so that we can make sure you get your funds. Another question is, have you done any projects achieving domestic content with geothermal? Josh, I'll let you jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Almost every one of them. So geothermal, most of the materials and equipment have a lot of domestic content in them. And so we've been seeing a lot of success with the geothermal projects achieving domestic content. So even without some pre-planning, you can kind of fall into that one. Solar is a little different animal. You really got to work hard to get domestic content. Geothermal is a lot easier. But yeah, the short answer is for sure. I think every geothermal project we've worked on so far has gotten domestic content.
Circling back on the 179D, the question here was, does the energy audit company or energy consultancy company qualify as a designer? I'm going to say yes, maybe. Just depends on your role, contractually, how what your contractual obligation is to the design, but we could definitely look at a case-by-case basis. But I would say more than likely, yes. If you're doing energy audits and you're coming up with savings and paybacks and specifying equipment, you're essentially eligible there for the 179D. And then the last question we have here, it says, have you had clients getting their direct payback since HR1 passed this summer? Although the direct pay wasn't affected, we have heard of a lot of peers in the community, including ourselves. We are waiting surprisingly long time to get the direct pay back. Are there aware that there have been many significant staffing cuts? Josh, you want to jump into that one?
I mean, yeah, we've definitely gotten refunds after that.
Yeah. I would say,
I mean, it is slow. It's no doubt it's slow right now, and I don't know if it's HR1 or if it's the shutdown or who knows what the problem is. But like kind of we mentioned in the webinar, then it's not great that it's slow, but at least you're getting interest. So most of our clients have gotten interest on their checks just because it's taken longer than 30 days to for them to issue the check. So at least that, but this is law, this is legislation that it doesn't matter what the administration wants to do or what one side of the aisle wants to do versus the other side of the aisle. They can't change this without legislation. And so if you meet all the requirements, you're going to get your money.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say that it is common for it to just take a while right now. Everything's taking a while. So, I've been listening to the team talk about the pre-registrations and, what we used to get back in a couple weeks, taking a month. And yeah, there's definitely been some delays in the process. So another question is, will the presentation be distributed? Absolutely. We'll send out presentation and follow-ups after this. We appreciate that. And then the last question here. It says, as the installation of a self-sufficient weather stations generally occur prior to other construction activities, would this implementation be considered the start of construction for purposes of the incentive program eligibility? Josh, you want to dive into that one?
I would lean no on that. I mean, unless you can somehow prove that was a mandatory piece of your solar installation. If it's a nice to have, would like to have kind of thing that you're doing in conjunction, then that's not going to trigger anything. But, like I said, it's all about making that case of, this was required and we only did it because we had to. Then, yeah, in that case, you might be able to make a case for it.
Yeah. Yeah, the IRS's language there is integral. So, right, it has to be integral to the, it has to be a really important piece of this, of the solar system for that to be the case. So great. Well, I think that's all the questions. Greatly appreciate everybody's attendance today. And like we mentioned, we will be sending this out. If anybody has any questions or wants to have any discussions or schedule any calls with us and the team, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get you with the right party on getting those questions answered. So thanks again and have a wonderful rest of your week, folks.